Hey everyone, this is Mike DeVita. I'm going to do a series of videos on configuring Windows Server 2012 R2 with Active Directory, DHCP, DNS, and then getting FreeNAS 9.3 stable, which is the latest version as of today, to talk to that Active Directory infrastructure, and then configure FreeNAS to use NFS and CIFS, and present those shares to Windows 7 box, and then an Ubuntu box. The Ubuntu box will talk to Active Directory and bind to Active Directory over what's known as AD LDS, which is Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services. Basically, just exposes an LDAP server, an LDAP-like schema to Linux-like hosts or BSD systems. That way you can get an Ubuntu server to bind to Active Directory, and then you can actually log into that Ubuntu server using your Windows credentials. Also on the Ubuntu system, we're going to configure NFS and get those NFS shares from FreeNAS mounted on the Ubuntu server, so that way we can set up a shared home folder and get all of our permissions working across those different systems. Finally, we'll take that excuse me, we'll take that Windows 7 box that I'm going to build, and we're going to bind it to the Active Directory domain, and we're going to mount shares to it. And I'm also going to configure what's called group policy objects to remap your documents, downloads, pictures folder to the FreeNAS automatically. So that way when you save something in Chrome or in IE and you download it, it automatically gets saved to the NAS, and you don't have to have copies of everything everywhere. It's all just on the NAS. Today's video will go over the basic intro on the infrastructure that I've got laid out for the lab and the explanations, and then we'll also go into configuring the Windows Server box. The later videos will go into configuring FreeNAS, we'll go into configuring Ubuntu, and then we'll finally go into configuring the Windows box. Basically, now for the introduction of the environment, I have all of my lab is set up on ESXi, and it's all virtualized. All of my core stuff, just to give you guys an introduction, basic overview, is on two different hosts that are running ESXi. All of my production stuff is right here under this SLAN folder and under this core folder. We won't be really looking in there today. What we'll be focusing on is this lab.devita.co folder. In there I've got a series of different virtual machines. Lin01 is the Ubuntu 14.04 server. Win01 is the Windows 7 x64 box. DCS01 is my domain controller box, Windows Server 2012 R2. Router01 is a pfSense box, which we're not going to touch today, or probably in this series. Might touch about it at the end of the series, get OpenVPN working with Active Directory and that kind of stuff. Maybe. We'll see how much time we have. Storage01 is the FreeNAS 9.3 box. Basically, excuse me, the FreeNAS 9.3 box has got a series of virtual hard disks. 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes. Four hard disks, 20 gigs each. And we'll use those to mock having actual real disks in a real system. Basically, all that's been done to these systems is the base installation. Haven't done any configuration yet. Actually, in fact, I think DCS01 here. Yep, it's still waiting for an administrator password. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that real quick. All right. Now, all of this stuff is either open source, which is completely free to use, or I got it free through Microsoft DreamSpark. Since I'm a student, I get all of this software for free. Windows Server 2012 R2. As long as you have a .edu email address, you can get all of this stuff for free. And what we're using right here is this 2012 R2 with update. And if you see here, there's 3 different versions. So that means you can have 3 different product keys with one educational email address. And that's basically what I did. I have a key for each one of these. My production environment runs the data center version, and then I think we're using the standard version for this lab. So now let's go ahead and start configuring the domain controller box. Like I said, it's just a base install. So I'm going to go ahead and do some preliminary configuration to get things going. I need to install VMware tools, and then we need to do some basic configuration to change the host name, set a static IP, and change the time zone. So while this boots up, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and get VMware tools installed, because it's not really doesn't really need to be covered. Most likely you're not going to be running this in a virtualized environment, I'm guessing, rather assuming. So I'll go ahead and pause the video and I'll come back once that's all done. Okay, we're back. VMware Tools is installed now. So I'm going to go ahead and log in, and we're going to start the baseline configuration, all the preliminary stuff before we can actually install the AD, DHCP, LDS, and DNS roles onto this server. Like I mentioned previously, there's a couple things we have to do. First thing is we need to configure the server name. I'm going to name it DCS01. The other thing we need to do is we need to set a static IP address. It's one of the prerequisites to having a DHCP or a DNS server on Windows Server. The last thing is set a time zone. And then we'll finally go into adding those roles and features and getting all that installed. Very first thing is Server Manager opens up here. Change the computer name. I name it DCS01. You name it whatever, it doesn't make a difference. And I'm not going to restart the system right away. I'm going to do it at the end of all the installation, just to have one restart. Next thing is this Ethernet. We're going to change this to, instead of using DHCP, to use a static IP address. You're going to right click on Ethernet and click on Properties. I don't run IPv6, so the first thing I like to do is disable that IPv6. The next thing here is you're going to click on IPv4 and click Properties, and then you're going to set an IP address. In my case, my lab uses its own VLAN of 21, and I like to give DCS01 an IP of .9. Subnet mask should autofill in. Default gateway, this is my production router, so 168.21.1. And then this is where a lot of people, I guess, kind of get hung up, is that the preferred DNS server is actually localhost. Because we're going to actually be doing internal lookups once DNS is configured. And what will actually happen is we'll create what's called domain or DNS forwarders, DNS lookup forwarders in DNS, in the DNS properties on this server once it's added, and then we'll set that to like Google's DNS. So what will happen is DNS resolution will occur for all of the local domain, and if it doesn't know of a DNS name, it'll actually go out to Google and come back and get it. Alright, so go ahead and click OK, click Close, and you can close that. Next thing is set the time zone. I'm in Arizona, so I'm going to set it to Arizona. Click OK. You can hit refresh here if you like. It should refresh most of the stats here. It should show the static IP, and then this will change. Your computer name won't change until you reboot, but like I said, that's not a big deal for now. Finally, that's all of the pre-install work that we need to do. The next thing we need to do is we need to add those roles and features that we want to put on this box. So go ahead and click on Manage, and then click Add Roles and Features. I like to skip this page by default. I just find it annoying. So Next. Just click on Next. Finally Next. And then here. We're going to enable Active Directory Domain Services. Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services. This is what enables what FreeNAS knows as Unix extensions. It exposes pretty much an LDAP server or LDAP schema, so Linux systems and BSD systems can connect to LDAP, the Active Directory infrastructure. So we want to enable that. DHCP, DNS, and then click on Next. Click on Next, Next, just keep on clicking Next until you get to confirmation. And then this is where I like to restart. because we still have to do that host name change. So then once that's all set, you can click on install, and it's going to go through the installation process and bounce the box. Once it comes back up, we'll go into configuring Active Directory, and then DHCP, and then DNS. I'm going to pause the video until this installation's done. Alright. Roles are installed, system rebooted. So let's bring it back up, and let's start doing the configuration. Once everything here is loaded up, I'm just going to click on local server and validate that the hostname changed and all that other stuff. Okay, everything should look good. Yep. Now let's go ahead and configure Active Directory. You're going to click on Promote the server to a domain controller. And it'll take a minute here to think. Pick a domain name. I'm going to use relative.media. And you want to add a domain controller to, or I'm sorry, add a new forest is what you're going to want to do. Root domain name, relative.media. Just make sure you use add new forest, 'cause since this is a completely new domain that we're configuring. I guess it should be mentioned that the root domain name should be like a .com or a .net. It doesn't necessarily have to, but I think that's considered best practice. For my production environment, it's devita.co. But I think it has I want to say 13 character limit. If you're going to have like Windows XP or anything earlier than that connecting to Active Directory, you really should conform to a .com, .net, or a local or something like that. Next thing is just pick a directory service restore mode password. I usually use the same password as the administrative account. It's probably not best practice, but I mean, we're behind a firewall, so it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, that's fine. You'll get this warning because there's no DNS servers configured yet. The Netbios domain name, this is what you're going to need to know when you configure FreeNAS. It's going to ask what is the Netbios domain name. Usually it takes the TLD, the part before the dot, and that becomes the Netbios domain name. In this case, I'm going to make it relative media, one word. Ideally, it should be whatever's before that dot. So if you have example.com, this should just be example. Oops. Click on next. If you configure a separate hard disk for storing stuff other than the operating system, this is where you'd specify all that stuff. In production, I've got a separate folder or a separate drive for all three of these. But this is just a lab, so don't worry about that. And then go ahead and click install. One thing that's never been really clear to me is whether or not for sure Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services, AD LDS, is actually required to use Unix extensions. One of the steps that we will do after we're done doing this is we'll run a series of PowerShell commands to enable identity management for Unix, also known as Unix extensions. So I'm not sure if both are required or if just one. My production environment, I installed LDS and then I did the Unix extensions, and that's how it works. you'll get a bunch of warnings. This is fine, don't worry about it. This one, again, because we haven't set up DNS yet, it's just giving you a warning about it. And then click on install. Alright, I'm going to pause it, and once it comes back, it'll be installed. Alright, system's rebooted. You'll notice now it's asking to log into this relative media / administrator. It created a domain administrator account, and that's what you'll use to log into the system now. Once again, Server Manager is going to come up, and then we need to configure DHCP and then do some configuration for DNS. Go ahead and click on the little flag and click Complete DHCP Configuration. Click Next. I just use administrator credentials to authorize. Basically what this is doing is it's telling the DHCP service to allow to talk to Active Directory domain services and bind to it. If you wanted to, you could create an alternate user with appropriate privileges and give that here, but I'm comfortable just using the administrative account. Go ahead and click on comment, and it should say done, and then close. Next thing you need to do is we need to configure DNS. So go to Tools and click on DNS. Expand, and then right here in forward lookup zones, basically we need to do some stuff to make sure that everything is basically baseline configured. Do some initial checks. We don't have a reverse lookup zone yet. We need to add one. Forward lookup zone maps a domain name to an IP address. Reverse lookup does the opposite. It matches an IP address to a domain name, which is actually one of the requirements for FreeNAS Active Directory to work. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to reverse lookup zones and right click and hit new zone. Click on next, and we want a new primary zone. I use to all DNS servers running in domain controllers in this forest, not in the domain. Click on next. It's an IPv4 reverse lookup, and then you're going to put in 192.168.21. The first 3 octets, pretty much. The last one is not filled out. I like to only allow secure dynamic updates. It's just the default that's checked. Basically, if this is checked, it allows non-authenticated systems to do DNS updates. Click on next and then click on finish. And then you should have a new zone here, and it should pop in to initial properties. Let's see, the next thing we need to do is we need to set up forwarding to go out and look up unknown DNS queries. So right click on the DNS server here, DCS01, and go to properties. Click on forwarders and hit edit. You're going to type in whatever external DNS you like to use. You can type in as many as you want here. You should at least have 2. 8.8.8.8 excuse me, is Google. 8.8.4.4 is Google as well. And then click on OK. It should validate. Right now it's not validating for me, probably because something is up with my router and the VLANs. So, but these should validate and say OK and get a little check mark right here. Go ahead and click OK. Click Apply. Looking through here to make sure that we have anything else that's missing. The other thing you can enable is enable automatic scavenging of stale records. Basically, it goes through and cleans up anything that's old. I think mine's set to 7 days in production. Let's see. I'm just looking to see if we have anything else that we need to change. I don't see anything else that stands out. Go ahead and click on apply and then OK. And I'll be right back while I figure out what's going on with the VLAN stuff. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so the Windows Server box is now able to reach out to the world through my router. So let me go ahead and you notice that this changed from a yellow flag to a regular. So I'm able to ping Google's DNS servers just to make sure. Go ahead and close all this down. The next thing I want to do is I want to set up configured DHCP. So back at Server Manager, you're going to click on Tools, DHCP. And we need to add a new scope. So if you right click on IPv4 and click a new scope, basically this is what you're gonna give a pool of IPs pretty much for systems to get a DHCP address. Name it something. I'm gonna call it lab. And then give a start to the range and then a stop to the range. I like to use 100 to 200. Gives you 200 IP addresses. You can add exclusions or delays or things like that here if you want to. I don't. Click next. Next. Yes, you want to configure the options. This is where you're going to specify the default gateway that DHCP is going to say, hey, use this IP address for the router or the gateway. In my case, it's 21.1. You're going to do the same thing for DNS servers. This is where you'll specify, hey, use the use DCS01's IP address that we configured for DNS. Don't use the router or whatever your public IP address gives. It should auto-populate in this case. Parent domain, it should give to the root domain that we set up when we configured Active Directory, in this case relative.media. You could change this if you wanted to have, for example, another scope to say I want everything that's in my office to be under office.relative.media, in which case it would assign it to that domain, and then you can change it. You can kind of organize and set up group policies based on that. But for this, we're just going to leave it as simple, whatever the root domain is that you set up. Click on Next. Wins, I don't use wins. Just leave it blank. Click on Next, and then you want to activate the scope now. Click on Next, and then click Finish. And then here you go. When you expand the scope, under Address Leases, as we start populating stuff in here and configuring stuff, you'll see systems pop up in here and get IP leases. Reservations is where you'll add static. You'll add systems to have static IP addresses based on MAC address. Basically, what I like to do in a production environment is I like every single system to use DHCP as much as possible. And then what I like to do is set up in DHCP, set up reservations to hand those out. So that way I can make one setting change in DHCP here, and it goes across and affects everything. For example, if I want to change the IP address of FreeNAS, I don't really have to go into FreeNAS and change the settings. I can just do it right here. Delete the reservation, recreate it, and then the next time FreeNAS reboots, it'll pull a new IP address. We're going to go ahead and minimize this for now because we're done with the DHCP configuration. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to configure Active Directory users and computers. We're going to create a username, a couple of usernames. Under Relative Media, Computers, this is where you'll see all your computers show up by default. Users, this is where all your users and groups will show up when you create them. Go ahead and click on Users and then click on Create a New User. Fill out the details. Give yourself a password. I don't like to do this one for my ID. If I create a new user in production, I usually just give them a password of like welcome1 and then make them change it the next time. I get tired of changing my password. Password never expires, and click on Finish. Okay, so there's my ID. Alright. The next thing we need to do is we need to enable Unix extensions. So we're going to run a series of PowerShell commands. You can get them at this URL, or you can just search for Enable Unix Extensions, Windows Server 2012 R2. And I think it's like the first link. Active Directory Unix Extension Server 2012 R2. And I think I clicked on this one right here. And then 2012 R2 and 2012 right here. Activate by using command line. To install, you'll type you'll run this one, and this command here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up PowerShell. Type these in one at a time. DISNXE. This will take a minute. It'll ask you if you want to reboot. I usually hit no. Next one. NIS/all. Oops. Don't want to reboot. And then the last command, we are actually going to issue a reboot. Enable -feature name psync. I'll be right back. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to go over some of the explanation as far as what we need to do to get Active Directory Unix extensions to work kind of seamlessly and to make everything make sense. You need to have a spreadsheet of some sort, at least that's how I do it, to keep track of how everything's mapped out. Otherwise, it's going to get kind of convoluted. Basically, what will happen is you will have a UID field in Active Directory, which you need to configure for each user that's going to have access to a Linux system, essentially, or access to FreeNAS file shares on a Linux system. Basically, how I did it is Active Directory based users all have start with a 40,000. Local users start with a 50,000. What we'll do then is we'll assign all of these users to different groups. Anyone that's going to have Linux access be able to log into an Active Directory, log into a Linux box via Active Directory, will have this Linux users group. If you're not in that group, you don't get access to a Linux system. VMware admins we won't really use. We won't create that group because I use that for doing vCenter access. Linux admins gives you sudo access to Linux boxes. VPN users is a group that will be used to filter in pfSense for allowing VPN access to the network. And then media, pretty much everyone will get access to. That's kind of the catch-all on FreeNAS that everything gets assigned to as far as a group goes, except for home directories. The other thing is that we need to map groups to group IDs. What I did is anything that's a local group gets a GID of 50,000, and anything that's an Active Directory group gets a GID of 30,000 and up. And this will make a lot more sense once we start going through the actual mapping of these attributes. Because whatever you set here will directly correlate to the permissions that you set inside of FreeNAS and inside of the Linux system. So it all kind of has to tie in together. It doesn't really matter what you use, it just document whatever IDs you're going to use. You can follow my example exactly if you want. You don't have to. That being said, go ahead and log into the box here. And then we're gonna set up some all these attributes. So go ahead and open up Active Directory Users and Computers. And let's go ahead and create a couple groups. Create a new group, and we're going to create Linux users. Linux admins. We're going to create a media group, and that should be good enough for now. Next thing that you need to do is we need to set these what's called Unix Attributes, which when you enable those Unix extensions, you'll get this tab here. And this is basically how you define on the Unix side from LDAP what their ID is, who the members are, and all that other stuff. NIS domain is relative. And then this is where you're going to set that group ID. So for Linux admins, I'm using 30,006. For Linux users, 30,004. The other thing we need to do is we need to define the properties for domain admins. Domain admins is 30,001. Domain users, 30,000. Oops. Did I do media? And then media. Media is 30,005. Now we need to define the Unix attributes for my ID and all the user IDs that you're going to use to log in. So that's this UID tab here. Basically, you're going to open up your name or whatever user you created and go to Unix Attributes, pick the NIS domain, and then this is where you set the UID. UID for me was 40,001. Login shell, I use ZSH, but for now we'll just do bin bash. Your home directory, I will get into this later. We're going to NFS mount the home directories from FreeNAS. I like to mount all my NFS mounts under exports. And what we'll do is, in the Linux side, we'll create a folder called exports/home, and then we'll NFS mount that FreeNAS share to that folder. So that way when you log in, it'll automatically mount your home directory for Linux to this here. Your primary group will not be domain admins. It should be Linux users. All users that are going to have Linux access should go to this group. If they're not going to be in that group, if they're not going to have Linux access, you don't need to define this information. Click OK. I'm going to do administrator as well. Administrator should have 40,000. And then Linux users. The next thing we need to do is we need to, now that we've configured Unix attributes for my ID and the administrator ID, we need to go ahead and add those two IDs to each of these groups. So like I said, all users with Linux attributes get added to the media group. You can hold the control key down to click multiple at once. Click add, click OK. They'll both show up there. I like to also add them on the Windows side. So if you go to the Members tab, you can add them here. And then click Apply, click OK. Do the same thing for Linux users. Even though that they're already set as primary group, I consider it a good thing to add them as a secondary group as well. Basically what we're doing here is we're setting the primary group and the secondary groups for these users. That's what it's known as on the Linux side. And then Linux admins, I'm going to give just the administrator Linux admin access. So that concludes this initial video of the entire series. In the next video, we will go through configuring FreeNAS 9.3 to bind to the Active Directory infrastructure we just created, and then we'll configure FreeNAS to use the DNS and all those other settings in FreeNAS to use the DNS settings from this Active Directory Windows Server box we just created. Then we'll go into, also in that video, configuring shares in NFS and CIFS in FreeNAS and getting all of those set up. And then we may or may not touch in the next video getting Ubuntu to bind to Active Directory using SSSD and getting those NFS mounts mounted. That might get pushed to a third video, depending upon how long the next video takes. Alright, with that, thanks for watching.